The Utah Jazz are by far and away the best team in the NBA this season. Out of their last 22 games, they have won 20 of them, just losing a game to the Clippers last night. This is the best shooting team in the NBA by far, a top 3 defense in the league, and they've been blowing out their opponents left and right, varying from bad teams to even great teams. But despite all of this, there are a lot of people questioning the actual legitimacy of this Jazz team, specifically when it comes time for the playoffs. They're getting a lot of comparisons to the 2015 Atlanta Hawks, which is a team that won 60 games in the regular season and had 4 All-Stars on it, but they weren't really All-Stars, and they got swept in the conference finals because they were not a real contender. They were pretenders. So there are a lot of people insinuating that the Utah Jazz themselves are pretenders, not contenders. But personally to me, I think they're a lot closer to contender than they are pretender, and let's talk about why.
Absolutely incredibly with the acrobatic alley-oop.
Before I continue on with this video, about half of the people that watch this video are not subscribed, so if you fall into that 50%, then subscribe. Also drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and it makes a massive difference. Also, real quick, new podcast out over on the podcast channel, so go check that one out. But with that out of the way, let's get on with this topic. Let me just further elaborate, add some more depth to just how good the Jazz have really been this season. As of right now, with a 58% three-point attempt rate, they shoot 39% as a team, which is insane. Conley is shooting a career high in attempts on a career high percentage. Same goes for Jordan Clarkson, same goes for Donovan Mitchell, same goes for Royce O'Neal. Meanwhile, Bojan Bogdanovic and Joe Ingles are also shooting amazing from 3. I've been waiting all season for this team to come down to earth shooting wise. I was like, okay, this Jazz team, they're just overperforming. They're making all their threes. That's going to go down. But at a certain point, no. I think this is how good this team is shooting-wise. And the reason I say that is, other than Royce O'Neal, there's no one on this team that's really outperforming their shooting ability that they have displayed in the past. Of course, there are career highs across the board for the most part, but none of them are outlandish. Another thing that's being slept on with this Jazz team is the depth. This team really has just an 8-man rotation, but the 3 men that are not in the starting lineup are all fantastic. Jordan Clarkson, as you probably well know, is by far and away the leading candidate for the 6th Man of the Year race. He's averaging 18 points per game on league average shooting efficiency, shooting a career high in attempts from 3 on a career high percentage. Joe Ingles is a playmaker and shooter off of the bench. He's shooting like 44% from 3 right now, which he's done a few times in his career. And he also brings about 4 assists per game off of the bench, which you would not expect from a old small forward who is slow as shit and isn't that great of a ball handler, but he's just a fantastic passer. And then finally, one of the most slept on elements of this team is Derek Favors. Now, I understand you might look at this and say, well, how impactful can a guy who gets 16 minutes a game be? Well, being that they have Rudy Gobert and you cannot play the two together, first of all, it's worth mentioning that Derek Favors is far better than the 16 minutes per game guy that he appears to be. But on top of that, those 16 minutes without Rudy Gobert used to really crush the Jazz because they really did not have a viable backup center option. Now they have one of the better backup 5s in the league. Then there is the defense. The Jazz are currently 2nd in defense in the NBA, and this of course can be attributed mostly to Rudy Gobert, but on top of Rudy Gobert being an insanely impactful defender, this team also has Royce O'Neal, who is a good defender, Mike Conley, who is a good defender, Donovan Mitchell, who is a solid defender, and Bojan, who is passable. And off of the bench as well, Derek Favors is pretty good defensively, and this team overall has very good defensive communication, to where the defensive ceiling of this team, the all-around team that is actually higher because of good coaching and good communication. Offensively, on top of the fact that this team is very good at shooting, is the fact that 1, Donovan Mitchell exists on this team, 2, Mike Conley exists on this team, but 3, just in general, the guys on the perimeter, they can both space the floor as spot shooters, but they can also create off of the dribble. Jordan Clarkson can attack off the dribble. Of course, like I mentioned, Conley and Mitchell can. Bojan Bogdanovic can. Joe Ingles can. Like, this is a team that can put the ball on the floor, and it's difficult to guard because there's no guy that you can just be like, if he's not open, he's not doing anything, because that's not the case with anybody except for Rudy Gobert on this team. It's kind of similar to the 2019 Boston Celtics, except with all of the egos and desire for shots getting in the way of the team's actual success. This Jazz team very clearly likes each other, and they like playing team basketball. Blech. But let's get into the reasons why people do not trust this Utah Jazz team. There are still people who do not believe the Jazz shooting is real. Now, I will give you this. I would not be shocked at all if the Jazz shooting came down to earth a little bit. But at this point, we are a third of the way through the season, and very rarely do we see drastic changes for teams at this point in the year. So because of that, on top of the fact that we're in an environment without fans, I really don't expect that shooting to drop all that much. On top of what I said earlier, only Royce O'Neal is like the only shooter on this team who's outperforming his actual shooting ability. And even Royce, I mean, he's almost taking exclusively open threes, so I would not be shocked if he continued to shoot this well from three as well. Rudy Gobert's drop coverage being exposed in the playoffs, him having to step up on the perimeter against guards and that not really working out. That is a very valid reason to be worried about this team, because we've seen that happen before, especially with the Houston Rockets. James Harden practically played Rudy Gobert off of the floor, and that is perfectly valid. All I will say is the teams that I think are overall better than the Jazz don't have many guards that are really capable of doing that. In fact, I really only think the Clippers are the only team that have a great pull-up shooter that's really going to screw over Rudy Gobert, and that's both Kawhi and PG. But after that, I think they can deal with anything. Even Damian Lillard, the overall Blazers, I don't think are good enough to where Dame's pull-up shooting with Rudy Gobert's drop coverage is going to make up for that. But with those basic two clear basketball reasons out of the way, really the biggest thing is that people are comparing this team to the 2015 Atlanta Hawks. So for context, like I mentioned earlier, the Hawks were a 60-win team. They had 4 All-Stars, but really, like, 2 of those All-Stars, I guess if I'm being nice, just one of them really should not have happened. That was Kyle Korver. But this was a team that was built around team basketball, ironically coached by Mike Budenholzer. That's not ironic. I just want to mention that Mike Budenholzer sucks. But he got a lot out of this team because there was no superstar on this team. The leading scorer on this team was Paul Millsap, who averaged 16.7 points per game. To win 60 games with your leading scorer averaging less than 17 is pretty goddamn wild. But throughout all of 2015, I remember everyone being like, we're not worried about this team. Like, they were being called the Spurs of the East, but the difference was the Spurs had a lot more talent, in my opinion. And we're also coached by the greatest coach of all time, not Mike Budenholzer. But by far the reason why this Hawks team was just viewed as illegitimate is they didn't have anything close to a superstar. Like, Al Horford or Paul Millsap were the best player on that team. Even if you're being nice, Jeff Teague, none of those guys were coming close to superstar caliber. And as a result, the 2015 Hawks got bitch slapped by the Cavs in the conference finals. And that is why people are really afraid of this Jazz team, because like the Hawks, they don't really have anyone all that close to superstar status. I'll say their talent overall is definitely closer than the Hawks' talent overall, but it is valid to say that the Jazz just simply do not have a superstar player. But the differences between the 2015 Atlanta Hawks and this year's Jazz is that the Hawks did not have a high-volume, decent efficiency score. This time around, the Utah Jazz do. Donovan Mitchell averages around 24 points per game on a little bit below league average efficiency, shoots very well from 3, and is incredibly clutch, as he proved in that Clippers game. So because they have Donovan Mitchell, my head goes to, well, the 2015 Hawks, when they were late in games, they didn't have a clear guy to go to. They were like, what do we do, an Al Horford face-up mid-range shot right now? Like, what kind of game plan is that? Where the Jazz can be like, okay, Donovan Mitchell, you get the ball, figure it out, you're a really good scorer. And more often than not, Donovan Mitchell is capable of figuring it out. We saw what he did in the playoffs versus the Nuggets last year. On top of that, with his Atlanta Hawks comparison, this Jazz bench is awesome. The Hawks bench was shit. After Dennis Schroeder, it was nothing but bad players, other than, if I'm being nice, a little bit of Kent Bazemore. So Yeah, that's another big difference. So depth, the fact that the two best players on the Jazz are better than all the players on the 2015 Hawks, the fact that Donovan Mitchell is a great shot creator and is going to be a guy you can rely on late in games makes me a lot more confident in this Jazz team than that Hawks team. If you want to be negative about the Jazz, really the comparison should be like the 2017 Boston Celtics or the 2018 Toronto Raptors, where that was a great all-around team that had a really good shot creator in DeMar DeRozan or a really good shot creator in Isaiah Thomas, but they ended up falling short because they didn't actually have a superstar level talent. But I would argue DeMar DeRozan really struggled versus the Cavaliers, and Isaiah Thomas was injured versus the Cavaliers. So the hope is that Donovan Mitchell, just this time around, does not turn into DeMar DeRozan, and that he does not get hurt. And if that happens, I say just about anything can happen. The only team that I am confident would beat the Jazz, like confident would beat the Jazz in a playoff series, is the Los Angeles Lakers. After that, I could see them beating the Clippers. I could see them beating the Nuggets. And then really after that, I think they're punching up. So yeah, or punching down, whichever one that is. Like every other team after the Nuggets and the Clippers are definitely worse than them in my opinion. So yeah, that's definitely interesting. I am of the opinion that this Jazz team is very good. And if I'm looking at it, I personally view this Jazz team closer to the 2004 Pistons than the 2015 Hawks. Now that could very well just me being very generous here, but I think, you know, great defensive center, really good team basketball, good depth, good coach, and a guard who knows how to create off of the dribble and is a very good leader and a clutch-ass player. I'm referring to Chauncey Billups here. This is a similar formula to me, and though I believe the Lakers would best them in a series, I wouldn't be shocked if the Jazz gave them a fight or even pulled off one of the bigger upsets ever. And if the Lakers somehow manage to lose before meeting the Jazz in the conference finals or anything like that, or the second round, then shit, anything is possible. So yeah, that's why I believe in the Utah Jazz and why I think you should too. Also, I shouted out the podcast earlier. There's also a new My NBA video, so go watch that as well. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, but that is the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and give you out your music.